Welcome to Issues and Answers with your host Dianne Kinderwater. Issues and Answers is presented as a public service to inform, educate, and better the lives of New Mexicans. And now, Issues and Answers with your host Dianne Kinderwater.
Welcome to the program. I'm Dianne Kinderwater. Thanks for joining us. I know you've heard of it. You possibly have been trained in it, and you possibly have even used it. What am I talking about? CPR. You've heard of it. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation. It combines chest pressing, mouth to mouth, in case somebody cannot breathe. CPR has been around our country for years, for generations, and we're trained in school. I know every Memorial weekend at the baseball park, they are out there learning CPR. Again, it's designed to save a life. And they say the first thing you do is you call 911, and then you start the chest pressing and the blowing. But what you might not have heard of, and it sounds similar to CPR, is QPR. And it's another way to save someone's life. Someone who is threatening suicide. QPR is question, persuade, and refer. Again, it's like CPR, but now it's for someone with their mental health needs and they need help. And also, unlike 911, there is another phone number to call. And I'll tell you all about QPR, how you can get involved, how you can get trained, how you can help save a life right after this. Welcome to the program. Who here has dialed 911 in case of an emergency? Well, there's a new number to dial. It's 988. It's the National Suicide Lifeline. It's 988 for Suicide and Crisis Line. Kind of interesting to know that there's something new and different. I imagine you can still call 911 if you're good, but if you dial 988, and we're going to show it, we're going to dial it right here on the air to show what you can get. But we're here today to talk about QPR and its mission to reduce suicidal behavior and save lives by providing innovative, practical, and proven suicide prevention training for the general public. Now, this is for anyone, not just professionals, but anyone can learn this. And I told my guests, it's a sad topic to talk about, but it's a hopeful topic, because if you and I are given these instructions on what we can do with QPR, we could save a life of a loved one who we're concerned about. So let's turn this doom and gloom topic to something a little more cheerful, that there's hope. We're going to give you some tools on what you need to do and tell you where you can turn to get more help. So thank you, Dianne Christensen, for always bringing me these very wonderful topics that you teach at the Bernalillo County Extension Program. You are a family consumer science agent. Thank you. This past year, many different topics, new topics, yes. Things that I'm dedicated in this new year in 2023 to do. And thank you for bringing this topic that's near and dear to all of our lives. Yes. Thank you, Phillip. Phillip Alden. He's a family and consumer science agent with Bernalillo County. You've been a participant in this program, and we're going to hear what you learned.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you. Thanks for being here, and Happy New Year to both of you, as we are still in this new year. And in this new year, we're going to learn how to save a life, not just by CPR, but QPR. Question, persuade, refer. It's a cute acronym, QPR, but you know, it's tough. It's tough out there. Yeah. Tell me how tough it is. What's going on in our society, that there's so many pressures and so many suicides. But now hope we can do something about it.
Yes, they're just, death by suicide is becoming more and more prevalent. And I was just looking at the data of deaths in New Mexico at a conference on Friday. And suicide is, in the top, the top causes of mortality. And so,
why is that, Dianne Christensen? Why?
I just think there's a lot of stresses. For example, during the pandemic, there was someone close to me that had lost their job, and I just watched this person become more and more despondent, was really not themselves. And I just remember being at this place one afternoon, and I just felt compelled to call that person and say, I am worried you're going to take your life, and I need to know. This was before QPR, and if I had taken QPR, you see, I would have known the verbiage to use, I would have practiced it, I would have it in my mind, but I was able to tell that person, I love you and you're dear to me, and this is a hard time, but you're going to get through it. And
since then, you've learned through this program,
as
you did, Phillip, Alden, as a family consumer science agent with Bernalillo County, you've actually taken the program. It's going to be taught, it can be taught in person and online, and it's a national program. Tell me a little bit about just the mechanics of you taking the program and why.
So the mechanics of taking the program, I took it online. It is a national program, so we were able to meet via Zoom. So I didn't actually have to be at any set specific location. And we had people from around the nation in our Zoom meeting. So you got perspectives not just from people who live in your area, but from all around the nation. We were able to do it in small chunks, and we were able to discuss the topics over an hour-and-a-half period.
So the class is an hour and a half? I think when I looked online, it's maybe $80 or something, but it's through the National Suicide Prevention.
It is.
Is that a federal government entity is presenting this class? Okay.
It is a federal government entity.
Okay, but now Bernalillo County, Dianne Christensen might be taking this on.
Yes, I plan to offer it several times a year. I just think it's a really important class. Nobody wants to talk about suicide, and I'm certainly among them. I wasn't even sure. I thought, I'm not a trained professional. I really think this is out of my, league. But, in our profession, for Phillip, for example, working with 4-H, has to have CPR. And so I thought, I should have that as well. I should have QPR as well.
So that's why you took it, Phillip. So you've taken CPR, which again is what, maybe a 2 hour, 3 hour, pumping
course.
and blowing, and now you took this QPR.
And I come from a psychology background with my bachelor's degree. So a lot of these topics are very prevalent even in today's psychological learning environment, because we do have a lot of teens and young adults we are noticing now, because of the pandemic, don't have the coping skills of normal people, just because they were isolated. And
they learned those crucial years, those 2 years.
During those crucial years, they didn't get the social aspect of a lot of these, the normal ways of going. So,
they didn't get knocked down and their teeth kicked in. Putting it bluntly, which we learn to be resilient by having that happen to us as we grow up as adolescents, right? You need to be disappointed and set up to learn how to deal with it. But they were isolated and they didn't have to deal with any of that. So now they come out of the pandemic and they don't.
Yeah, they've got feelings of isolation. They don't have the coping skills to deal with that. So we're noticing an uptick in suicide. Which is not what any of us want. So we, through this program, are given the tools to talk to them. We are not licensed therapists, and we are not claiming to be licensed therapists. That's why the last step of QPR is refer. So we are just... Question.
Then persuade, which is difficult when they're mentally ill, or not mentally ill, depressed.
Yes.
And then refer part to someone who is an expert.
Someone who is an expert. So we are just giving those who want to take the class ways to have the correct verbiage, ways to talk to people who are going through a mental crisis, and then being able to have the resources to refer them to a licensed therapist.
And with your friend, as we all have friends and or family members who are concerned about, with your friend, you did speak to them, but after you've taken the class and now you're going to be teaching it, did you find what they're presenting could have helped you, take the stress off of you?
Yes, very much, because it just helps you to kind of hone your own way of asking, but basically it's asking, are you considering taking your life? And it takes the scariness out of it. And then persuade.
Wait, how does it take the scariness out of it?
Well, just because you think, well, that's personal, I don't want to ask, I'm just, oh gosh.
Yes.
Whereas if you can just practice it a couple of times, like Dianne,
wow.
I'm concerned, are you considering taking your life by suicide? I can say it, it's straightforward, and then the person has a chance to maybe share what they're struggling with, and just because you ask one question, and then you can persuade them of the value of their life.
We're going to go through all of that, but just the initial is by asking the question. I think as a layperson, not having taken the class, if I were to ask Phillip this, I'm putting it into their mind that I'm thinking they are considering because there's a problem. That's a concern of asking. We're going to move on to all that. We're going to give the tips, but before we do, you're going to tell me a little bit about the 988 number, and I'm going to dial it right now it's a national hotline for crisis that probably people don't know about.
Reached the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. We are here to help. Para español, oprime el número 2.
Amazing. Instead of 911, let's...
To reach the Veterans Crisis Line, if you are a U.S. veteran or service member or are called
Veterans,
press 1.
Veterans have a lot of stress,
Support for
suicide,
people under the age of 25, press 3. Otherwise, please remain on the line.
Ooh, that's for us.
Your call to a Lifeline crisis counselor.
And those are licensed people. So just getting that word out about the 988. I think we have a little video we're going to show before we get the tips about questions right now that Mike's going to roll, and we're going to hear a little bit about the 988 that Dianne Christensen gave us information on. So thank you for that, Dianne. Here's the video.
I'm Jessica Rosenworcel, the chairwoman of the Federal Communications Commission. Every 11 minutes, someone in the United States loses their life to suicide. All across our country, people are hurting and they need help. The good news is getting that help just got a lot easier. Effective immediately, if you call or text 988, you will be connected to the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. There, professional support is available for anyone with a mental health emergency. The new 988 Lifeline is free, it's confidential, and it's available 24/7. It's also a game changer for mental health in the United States. Like 911, establishing a universally known number for suicide prevention will increase awareness of these issues and decrease the stigma surrounding mental health. So I have a message for anyone out there who might feel like you need help and you've got nowhere left to turn. You're not alone. It's not too late. Dial 988.
Thank you for that. Again, 988 is a number to call for someone considering, but 911 if you need to call for someone. You mentioned the young people, the isolation, but Dianne, you mentioned the highest number of people considering or committing suicide in our community would be middle-aged men.
Yes, I was shocked by that. I didn't really think that the people, my audience, maybe would need this. And I put the question to my husband. I said, what do you think is the highest suicide rate? And he guessed it, middle-aged men. And so that was really informative to me, that this covers all spans, all generations.
And why did your husband realize this?
He just said, I said, that's amazing to me. How do you know that? And he said, because at that age, you're dealing with family pressures. Maybe your career hasn't gone like you thought it would. There's a lot of disappointment, I think, at that point for middle-aged men. So it makes sense.
Is there a mental illness component related to suicide? I mean, is everybody who commits suicide or considering it mentally ill?
No.
No.
Phillip?
So statistically, those who seek help, even with a mental illness, will have better outcomes. It's those who do not seek help. And that's why for middle-aged men, that's why it is so high, is because there's a social stigma around middle-aged men seeking help. And we want to destigmatize that, especially through our class. You can seek help. no matter who you are, what you're going through, there is help.
Thank you for that, Philip. There's a concern. If you're concerned about a loved one, or you just like to have the training because you like to be on top of things like you are, CPR, run to the restaurant and you can save someone's life. The training is, again, for lay people, not professionals necessarily, and there's individual training, organizational training, special group workshops and pricing, and professional training. Where can they find information on this training?
They could just Google QPR, question, persuade, refer, and it brings up a website that shows you can get training information. You can also look on our website, bernalilloextension.nmsu.edu, and we'll be offering the trainings throughout the year.
Okay. We don't have any dates at this point
No.
of the training. But what we do is some tips right now. What are first the signs, Philip, that you should be concerned about a family member, a loved one, a neighbor, a workmate?
So there are 4 different types of signs. There are direct signs, indirect signs, social signs, and
Situational? Or
situational.
So the signs are,
These
what were
signs
they
are
again?
Direct signs.
You can directly see.
Directly see, directly
Okay.
hear. These are direct verbal cues. There are indirect verbal cues
That people may say, okay.
that people may say.
Behavioral cues, they're
Behavioral
acting
cues.
strangely, or situational.
Situational cues.
Meaning they lost their job.
Lost your job.
They don't have money to put gas
Yeah.
in their car.
The normal, especially through the pandemic, we've seen a lot with the situational cues, just because we've had prices rise, we've had job loss, and we've had isolation. So a lot of these situational have become more prevalent in the past. When most people talk about suicide, you think the direct verbal cues. Like, I'm going to kill myself. I wish I were dead. And most people, when you hear that, you're like, oh, that person is suicidal. But there's a lot more components to that where you may not know. And so, like...
Well, is it that blatant? I mean, people are saying, I'm going to kill myself.
Yeah.
Are there cases?
There are a lot
So
of
let's stay
cases.
with the direct verbal cues. That seems
Yes.
kind of the easiest one to find. If somebody's saying it, then that's easy to identify. No offense, but
Yeah.
that's pretty easy.
It's easy to identify.
Do I identify that? So if someone says that, starting with a QPR question, what type of question should we be asking?
Are you considering taking your life by
Oh, that's the
suicide?
same when you asked me that. Made me very uncomfortable.
Yeah, or
But
you
that's-
can phrase it, however, but it opens the door for them to tell you what's wrong.
So just asking, are you considering committing suicide? And I think early part of the show, I was concerned by asking that, because I would think you're planting that idea, number one, and number two, they may think something's wrong with them because I'm asking such a question. So obviously people see there's something wrong, so I should do it. That's what my fear to ask the question.
I think that's a lot of people's response, and that's probably the stigma. But if someone says, I wish I were dead, then if you say nothing, like, oh, and what'd you have for breakfast?
Which-
that's
right.
painful.
Change
Like they
the
say these big things, and, well, tell me, I'm concerned. Are you thinking about taking your life by suicide? And, well, yeah, because all of these things, so it shows that you care, and that you're willing to risk a pretty hard question.
Philip, you're nodding your head.
Yes, during our training, we actually had one lady who was coming in and learning how to be a trainer. And she was talking about how in her church group, she had just taken this training.
I'm sorry, what?
During her church group, she had just taken this training, and she had a young gentleman who she noticed some of these direct signs, and she asked that question. And he had no one to talk to before her. And just opening the dialogue, are you thinking about it? He was able to talk to her. So what QPR does is it opens the door to have active listening. And
Wait, opens the door to have active
Active
listening.
So you don't want to brush someone off who has suicidal thoughts. So like you guys were just discussing, you don't want to be like, oh, that's great, what did you have for breakfast? You want to be open, and then once they start talking to you, you want to be actively listening and not trying to inject yourself into their life. Most people just need an ear to listen to.
Mm-hmm.
You're nodding.
Yes. Just listen. And the next step is to tell them the value of their life, what they've meant to you, the impact of their life, because at that point they're just so focused on the problems. And we get through these problems, I know certainly at my age and stage, I know certain things are not the end of the world, that life will go on.
But if there's no purpose sometimes, no purpose.
Right, yeah. It's
in
just
the world. No purpose.
It's a very hard time in their life, but just coming alongside. And then the last step is refer, and I think that's where a lot of people don't know where to go, but this 988 number, dial 988 yourself, get them connected to the right person, and you've given them you've referred them. So this is just to be a bridge between a person in crisis and getting professional help. You can serve as a bridge.
Okay, direct verbal cues. Any other question you could be asking or in addition?
Well, some other things are, indirect verbal cues like, I'm so tired of life. They're not quite as obvious. I just want out.
I'm sorry, what was it?
These are indirect verbal cues like, I just want out. Oh, this is a big one. My family would be better off without me. And a lot of times they really believe that at that point. And so when you hear those kinds of things, that's something to be looking for. And then behavioral clues.
Well, wait, the indirect. Before we move on,
sure,
any other question than saying, any other questions you can be asking?
I think a beginning question might, even before you maybe move to the suicide intention, just, you don't seem yourself lately. How are you doing? Just simply asking them.
You don't seem yourself.
You don't seem yourself lately. How are you doing? That's very, it shows caring, but it's not, being too prying, I guess. Some people feel like, you need to respect privacy, but that's a general question. Hey, you don't seem yourself. How are you doing?
Okay, that's an easier one. I mean, not easy, but easier than asking, are you considering suicide?
Yeah, that could be a good lead in. And then just
if they open up, right?
Yeah, and then if they're saying, well, who cares? My family would be better off if I was dead. Those kinds of things are sort of indirect. And that helps you get an idea of maybe where.
What are some other indirect verbal cues, would you say?
I just want out, things like that. I'm tired of life, I can't go on. Maybe you won't have to worry about me much longer. Things like that.
Okay.
Those are some things that you want to take notice of.
Behavioral cues.
Those involve any previous suicide attempt, if you're aware of that. Acquiring a gun or stockpiling pills can be an indicator. Co-occurring depression, moodiness, hopelessness, those. We all have different times where we're depressed and hopeless. And it doesn't mean mental illness, it's just, what happens to us sometimes. If you see them really putting their personal affairs in order or giving away a lot of their possessions that would seem out of the ordinary, that would be another sign.
You're nodding your head, Phillip.
Yes, and this doesn't mean someone who's doing spring cleaning, because we all have that time in our life where, like, I just gotta give some stuff away. This is out of order, non-characteristic giving. So someone who has a prize Lego set or a prize collection of something, if it's something that they would never part with, and suddenly they're like, oh, here, have part of this collection, that is a sign. Whereas if someone's just going and they're like, oh, I'm giving away some clothes, that's normal. So we want these larger, something that they would never normally give away. That is a cue of that type of behavior.
Any other cues that you have?
Let's see, drug or alcohol abuse, excessive drug or alcohol abuse, and particularly a relapse after a period of recovery. That can be very discouraging to someone, but it is part of the recovery process. Unexplained anger, aggression, or irritability can be another thing. Another one is sudden interest or disinterest in religion. That's another thing. So all of those are, if you see someone thinking, wow, that seems out of the norm, that
You can ask the question.
Mm-hmm.
You don't see them yourself.
Yeah.
Situational cues, give me a few of those.
Our situational cues, especially during the pandemic, we have noticed a lot of these. It's being fired or expelled from school, recent unwanted move, loss of any major relationship, whether that be family or personal relationship, death of a spouse, child, or best friend, especially by suicide, increases that risk. Diagnosis of a serious illness or mental illness, sudden or unexpected loss of freedom or fear of punishment, loss of a cherished therapist, counselor, or teacher, and then fear of becoming a burden to others. These are the major situational clues that you usually see.
And again, you question, persuade, what is this persuade part?
Persuade is just telling them the value that their life has, what they've meant to you, what they've meant to others. It's reminding them of the much bigger picture. Like, for example, if a person says, my family would be better off without me. Really? Would your kids be better off without you? No.
And then from that, you can refer. Dianne, Christensen, Phillip, thank you for being a part of this program, bringing this very important topic. And to get more information, what do you suggest, Dianne Christensen?
Look up QPR in your browser on your computer to find out more about it. You can also contact bernalilloextension.nmsu.edu.
Because you'll be offering a class if you do. And your suggestion, Phillip, Alden, about taking the class, what has it meant to your life?
It has helped me a lot in my life. Previously, before this job, I was a college counselor, and so I saw a lot of these situationals, and I had no idea how to handle it. But since taking this class and working for this organization, I have been able to use those clues, impart it to other professionals who aren't licensed therapists.
Thank you.
And it allows for
Meant
more
a
people.
lot in your life to affect other people's life. Thank
Yes.
you so much for being part of this program. And again, you can dial 988 if you need help now. Thanks for watching. I'm Dianne Kinderwater. Make it a great week with your family. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Issues and Answers with your host Dianne Kinderwater is presented as a public service to inform, educate, and better the lives of New Mexicans. To comment on today's program or to purchase a copy of any Issues and Answers program, visit sunbroadcasting.org or call us at 505-345-1991.